by 4 different ways. The perceptive feelings that everyone, the brain becomes aware of dehydration first and produces its own markers of dehydration, which we never understood. Then water rationing programs are the next indicators. And then we have crisis calls of the body for water and disease complications. These 4 stages of dehydration in the body are now understandable. We need to become more aware of them as we go along. And if we come across people who have these problems, we can tell them easily that they're not sick, they're just thirsty. Go and hydrate the body. Feeling tired is a sign of dehydration. When you haven't done a good day's work and you're tired, first thing in the morning you wake up, you're tired. You have no energy to get out of bed. You're dehydrated. Why? For 8 hours you've slept, you've respired water out of your body, because everybody loses about 1/4 of water through breathing. Water evaporates and leaves your body through the lungs. And you've perspired under the bedclothes, and you haven't drank enough water for 8 hours, but you've manufactured urine which is sitting in your bladder. So you're truly dehydrated by the morning, and your brain cells, when they need energy of hydroelectric energy to be vibrant and alive, they don't have it. So you get tired unnecessarily first thing in the morning or throughout the day when you're active, and it's not a high intensity activity, and yet you get tired. That's a sign of dehydration. Water is a better pick-me-up than anything you can imagine. Feeling flushed, again, the vascular system to the face stems from the same route as goes to the brain. So when vascular system in the brain is being opened up, nonetheless the vascular system to the face will also open up, because face is the extension of your brain. Your face is not just the nose, 2 eyes, and a mouth, and your 2 ears, but it's full of nerve endings. Your face is in fact a receptor dish that's connected to your brain, and it reads its environment constantly. And so it needs more circulation to be integrated with the brain activity. When there is dehydration and the brain recognizes that dehydration, it also brings more circulation to the face, because those are the extensions of its activity. Being irritable, again, I've explained these in the book, you can read those. Being anxious, being dejected, these are all consequences of not having enough energy for brain function. And depression is another sign of dehydration, because not only you become depressed by energy loss, but you also become depressed because you lose the amino acids such as tryptophan and tyrosine, which are supposed to revitalize your brain function. You lose serotonin level in the brain, and that's why a lot of people who are depressed have low serotonin level as a result of losing tryptophan. And also water is vital for tryptophan to go across the blood-brain barrier. When in dehydration, its competitors go across the blood-brain barrier. Having a heavy head and not a headache, that's a sign of dehydration. Cravings, alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, dehydration cravings. You need to increase water intake, and you can kick off any habit. Then we have the water drought management programs of the body: asthma, allergies, hypertension, old age diabetes, and autoimmune disease. These are all signs that the body is in crisis drought and resource management. One of the areas where drought management hits us in our society is asthma. It affects 17 million people. 15 million children suffer from asthma, because lungs are where you lose water. Lung tissue can become very dried up when you take rush wind into the lungs, and rush wind plus all the water vapor that can leave out of the lungs. And unless there is water coming from the base to rehydrate the lung tissue, the lung tissue, which is very delicate, and these air sacs are very thin membranes, could immediately become dried up and brittle, very much like washings that you put on the line in order to dry them up in the wind. The lung tissue can get dried up. So the body cannot allow the lung tissue to be damaged because you are not drinking enough water. In fact, you should drink some water right now. That water is no good in the bottle. It should be inside you. So the lung tissue shuts down. Histamine is the regulator. It shuts the bronchioles down in children because the bronchioles are very delicate and they haven't developed the cartilage structure yet to be firm. They tighten much more quickly, and that's why 15 million children suffer from asthma. And every year, many thousands of these people die because of the ruthless action of histamine, that it does not understand that this action will kill the person. It's been trying to tell that person for some time that you are dehydrated. That's why initially there is a cough in asthma, not being able to breathe properly, and then you continue to run, eat, and without hydrating the body, and eventually you precipitate an asthma attack. Whereas if with the initial cough of asthma, people begin to drink water, that cough will go and asthma attack will be aborted. In fact, as soon as there is shortness of breath with asthma, a glass or two of water straight away and a tiny pinch of salt on the tongue will abort an asthma attack much better than any of these inhalers. Hypertension, 66% of the water loss is from inside the cells, 26% is from outside of the cells, and only 8% is from the vascular system. But the vascular system tightens up, it closes its capillaries, and that's why we develop a resistance effect in hypertension. But that 66% water loss is the damaging factor. In hypertension, there is reverse osmosis program going on, and that's what hypertension is all about. When the resistance increases, more force has to be brought to bear in order to force the water into the cells. And this drought management program and reverse osmosis is what the body is engaged in. We need to facilitate it by giving it more water and giving it more salt to expand the ocean of water outside of the cells so that this reverse osmosis program can take place much more easily in the meantime until we build up enough water that it can go through the cell by process of diffusion. Pancreas is another water distribution organ. It produces watery bicarbonate solution and injects it into the first part of the duodenum in order to neutralize the acid that comes out of the stomach. Pancreas also produces insulin that opens the gates, and sugar can move into the cells and as a result carry the other amino acids and water. This is an embarrassing situation when the body is short of water. So the mechanism that brings water to the pancreas in order to manufacture a watery bicarbonate solution more and more will shut down the insulin producing mechanism. In other words, prostaglandin E, which is the main subordinate water regulator to histamine, gets engaged non-stop in bringing more circulation to the pancreas, will shut down insulin production. So old age diabetes or type 2 diabetes is a condition of dehydration of the body. Once we begin to increase water intake and salt intake, we can reverse that. We can cure diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And type 1 diabetes, which is the mechanism that goes beyond it, becomes an autoimmune disease, as I will explain. Insulin-producing cells are destroyed. This condition, too, will benefit by increased water intake. The need for insulin will decrease drastically, and we prevent the secondary damage of dehydration, such as vascular damage and retinopathies and things like that. So these things will disappear. They will not occur because they are secondary damage produced by dehydration. Autoimmune diseases are insulin-dependent diabetes, just I explained, neurological disorders such as multiple sclerosis, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, lupus, muscular dystrophy, chronic fatigue, Hashimoto's disease, a whole lot of other conditions are produced as a result of a cycle that begins to establish in an area. The damage of dehydration occurs when cortisone begins to secrete a lot of interleukin-1 and depresses interleukin-2 production, which are two elements that the white cells produce in circulation in order to regulate their subordinate actions. Interleukin-2 stimulates immune system and interferon production, which are the defense mechanisms against bacteria and cancer and a whole lot of other things. In dehydration, to the point that we have to rely on cortisone activity, this element becomes destroyed or suppressed. Interleukin-1 is responsible for mobilization of elements from the body tissues themselves. This is a slide that I need to explain to you. Vasopressin that I showed you earlier is a cortisone release factor. It's a very strong cortisone release factor. It's a modulating cortisone release factor. When dehydration occurs in the body and vasopressin becomes more and more active, vasopressin produces cortisone release factor, and cortisone release factor stimulates interleukin-1 production. And this becomes a vicious circle. More and more occurs. At a certain level, a substance called interleukin-6 and another one, tumor necrosis factor, are secreted. These are the elements that take cells out of the system, they break them down, they fragment the interior of the cells, and the nucleus is broken down into segments that are refloated into the system and picked up by other tissues as primary raw materials that have already been manufactured in one or another capacity. It's like when a car is broken down, you take the carburetor of one car and put it in another car. These elements that are broken from the DNA are being used in other capacities. Now, interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor stimulate proteases in the body, and this is a part of the remanufacturing process. But if it gets stuck on the job with dehydration, it continues to the point of producing DNA damage and RNA damage and fragmenting more and more cells. At a certain level of fragmentation, the segments of the DNA that are produced or RNA that are produced have unfortunately been labeled as viruses, slow viruses, such as HIV, such as Coxsackie virus in chronic fatigue. In AIDS, when they cultured the cells that are producing AIDS, they gave the cells interleukin-6 extensively and harvested the virus. So they were fragmenting the DNA. That's what interleukin-6 does. It does it actually in insulin, breaking down the beta cells. Interleukin-6 breaks down the beta cells and produces the type 1 diabetes. Now, in